Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle. We got some recruiting stuff to talk about today. We've got some new staff hires and maybe a little talk about the upcoming draft and the like. Anyway, usual crew with us: Eric McKinney, Mark Holken, Greg Katz. I'm Chris Arledge. Okay, guys, let's do this. This seems to be staff hiring season, and so just about every time we come on here, there are new staff members. And for those of you out in YouTube world who are thinking, "Who cares?" Well, I just out of curiosity, I looked up Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas, and I can tell you we still haven't caught them when it comes to staff. So if it's simply a matter of writing a check, those are the three biggest check writers in the country, I suspect. They're still hiring people, but maybe there's nothing to it, but we're going to see. I think Eric McKinney will have an opinion. Eric, tell us who the new staff hires are and what we should think about this. Does it matter? Should we care?
Straight to me. So if you're gonna bring in Chad Bowden and you're gonna give him kind of the keys to the castle as the GM and running this thing, you want to let him bring in people he's familiar with. So Zaire Turner comes in from Notre Dame, Drake Brown comes in from Illinois, and these are people that he's worked with before. Dre Brown was recently at Illinois, but before that at Notre Dame, he and Bowden kind of tag team a bunch of that stuff. So again, you want to same thing a bit with Danton Lynn and having guys that he's familiar-ish with, so you hit the ground running. I think that's kind of big for that. But again, those are things you need to staff. There are so many people out there. There are so many available recruits at any one time with the transfer portal right now. And having enough sort of hands and eyes and ears and all of that to go get in on people right now when they go in the portal. And not that I'm suggesting anyone do this or that anyone at USC has or any of these people have, but if you know somebody might be going into the portal, or hey, there's somebody out there that we could use on this roster, right? That's something where the more connections you have and the bigger that sort of staff is, the quicker you can act in putting these rosters together. And look, in-game decisions, coaching ability, getting players ready each week, that's paramount when the season gets here. Putting the best roster together just won Ohio State a national championship, right? I mean, those guys played well, the coaches coached well. Having the best players, having that staff that can assemble that again, having NIL ducks in a row and all that in order, it's huge for college football right now. So it's one of those things, the more you invest in this, I know people want to say players make plays and coaches have to win games. You got to put a roster together, and USC's done a really good job this offseason of putting together a roster of people that can put together a roster of players.
That's a good idea, Eric. We should hire one staff member from all top 20 programs so we can get intel on their players and tamper better. We could tamper more effectively. I mean, I don't know that we should promote it that way. It just seems to me that's probably something that should be done. Well, here's the big question. Did Notre Dame want to lose another person? If the answer is no, then I'm happy. Even if that person just sits at a desk and collects a paycheck and does nothing, which, by the way, is what I do most days. Okay, guys, any thoughts on the new staff members? I mean, that was pretty good rundown by McKinney, but maybe you guys have some thoughts he didn't have. I don't.
Um, I thought it was interesting that at least the three that I saw had to do with recruiting. And I don't know, what made me think about this was you look at Ohio State, they lost their defensive coordinator, right? He's going to Penn State, Knowles. Now, of course, Chip Kelly, former UCLA head coach, is leaving Ohio State and joining Pete Carroll in Las Vegas. So you win the national championship, and both of your coordinators are bailing on you. And, they obviously have done a good job in most areas, and they wouldn't, be contenders or be national champions. But I thought it was interesting that, at least from a USC perspective, You have the assistant athletic director of recruiting, you have director of recruiting, and uh, uh, people involved in the portal, NFL. I'll go back to what I've been saying, in which people will say, okay, we get it, that's enough, move on. It really gets down to winning games. And to win games, you have to have players, right? And you got to get the players, which means, does all this give the false impression, which it probably does, that, are the assistant coaches, really going right at it? One of the things I did notice was these hires, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're not from the LA area. They're not from Southern California area, to my knowledge. Um, and I get concerned with that because it's almost as though, even though we see some stuff for California, uh, I know that the 2006 class is, got some, California guys, but when it's all said and done, who's going to be held to the bottom line for the recruiting? I mean, I could hire Chris Arledge and, you know,
Don't do that.
well, I was just doing
That doesn't help anybody, Greg.
I was doing that to see if you were paying attention, and obviously you weren't paying attention. But the bottom line is they need to produce in Southern California recruiting, and if all these additions help them do that, I'm all for it. But they have to get it done.
Well, let's talk about Southern California recruiting because we just had a big junior day this past Saturday. Huge number of recruits on campus, a lot of big names, including some that I don't even know if USC is in the mix for, like Chris Henry. But big junior day. Let's talk about that. Mark, why don't you start us off? I know that we don't have any official commits from the weekend, but it sounded like it was a pretty positive experience for most of the people involved. What are the biggest storylines coming out of this past Saturday, Mark?
So Greg was kind of touching on it there at the end about the Southern California need. So some of the feedback I've gotten so far, let's just start with Chad Bowden. The fact that he was able to arrange that the media could be there, kind of act like the paparazzi, take, as the kids stepped off the van, taking pictures, the whole red carpet thing. I think that was a good step in the right direction. And then when we talk about this weekend, it was heavily influenced by Southern California recruits. And more feedback from that was, they hit a home run. They killed it. They made every single player and family member there welcome. Like, oh my God, where have you been? Why haven't you been here before? We're glad you're here now. And then they took it a step further and they took a player, they introduced him to another player, and they started generating some camaraderie amongst these guys who they're recruiting. So they are starting, maybe it feels a little, contrived, but they are making an effort to really focus in on California, Southern California especially, and then work their way out. So you start at home and then you start working, all right, let's bring in guys from around the country. So if your first junior day is going to be heavily influenced with Southern California and California kids, the next ones that come up later, whether it's in the spring or June when they usually hold those invite camps, now you can start focusing in on those guys from around the country, where you start cherry picking. If you go back to the Pete Carroll days, you're looking for guys that are NFL draft picks, but you got enough from Southern California, your own backyard, that you can build your roster that Eric was talking about.
And you did that here, right, Mark? I mean, that was Xavier Griffin comes out. You need to make Xavier Griffin feel like a Southern California kid. Like if you have a guy like that, those are your cherry picked guys out there. If your quarterback in this class is going to be Jonas Williams, right, and an Illinois kid, if you're going to go after him, you bring him out. But those you're not flying out 75 Georgia, Louisiana kids for something like this. For other things, if there's a big 7-on-7 event and you just want to run 600 kids through your campus and hey, let's see if we can catch a few, that's fine. But yeah, for this one, it's exactly the blueprint that you said, right? You get a Vance Bafford to come out and say, hey, we're gonna go, in on you here. Talanoa Ely, like say those guys, Tom Tapui, like you bring Those guys that have felt Oregon and Oregon and Oregon and Georgia and Texas A&M and all of that for so long, and the number of players that they brought in like that, like you're saying, where it's like, no, this is the group. This is the group that we want to build around. Pick and choose a few outside of that, but I think they did a good job. Colorado kid, Arizona kid, Northern California kids coming down that same area that, it sounds dumb to say Southern California, but if you're USC, like Southern California has to extend out to those areas too, where you get, I mean, the best Colorado kid has been going to Michigan, Oregon, Washington for it feels like a while now. And so getting back into that state, getting really into Arizona, I think that's big. But Mark's right. That's what they tried to do. It seems like that's what they did.
Let me,
Yeah, let's
yeah,
talk.
go ahead. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Greg.
No, I was going to say, what do you guys think about this push of recruiting? Is it something that Lincoln Riley realizes they have not done a good job? Is it that he realizes he really has not done a very good job at all in Southern California when you consider the numbers?
I,
What is this transformation for?
I think he's trying to transition away from the transfer portal. How much I don't know, but they haven't been that successful. I mean, they've been able to pluck a player here and there, but where they need the most help has always been up front, both sides of the ball, offensive line, defensive line. 2026, California can give USC everything they need on both sides of the ball. So you don't need to be as reliant on that transfer portal. So I'm hoping that's the thing. Plus, again, now I think you have a better idea of how your revenue sharing is going to work. You have a better idea of, how everybody's going to be using NIL. There's no rules. You might as well just start doing the pay for play out of high school thing if everybody else is going to do it. USC was hesitant to do that out of the box. They were like, hey, show me what you've done in college and I'll pay you for that. So I think it's just a whole bunch of stuff. I don't think Lincoln Riley got smarter all of a sudden. I think he's at the point now where, you know what? Let's just focus on what we have here in California. Go cherry pick those kids that Eric brought up, the Xavier Griffin, maybe the quarterback from Chicago, Jonas Williams. But you got to stay home now. You've had enough time trying to put it all together from all over the place.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
there are very few programs that recruit all of their roster nationally, right? I mean, Notre Dame does to a large extent, but it's probably not an accident that Notre Dame hasn't won a national title since 1988. And while they had a really good team this year, they were not close to the most talented team in that playoff. And that's just a difficult way to assemble a roster. It is not possible to do what USC was trying to do. And maybe they thought they had to do it because they didn't like the California talent the last couple of years. But it's not possible to pull most of your guys out of Texas and the South and not out of Southern California. Look at Ohio State's roster. They got a bunch of dudes from Ohio. Yes, they cherry pick from other places. They got a bunch of guys from Ohio. Georgia has a bunch of guys from Georgia. Florida, the Florida schools have a bunch of guys from Florida. And USC has always been able to cherry pick superstars from other places, which they did this past recruiting class. But the bulk of your guys are going to have to be from Southern California. Otherwise, it's just too easy for people to come and swoop them away at the last second, and it happens all the time. So this is clearly something they have to focus on, and there are some exceptions, obviously. I mean, Jonas Williams is not a Southern California kid. He's a pretty fast kid from what I can tell on video. I mean, he can really move. That's an impressive athlete at quarterback. I don't know that anybody was talking about him 2 weeks ago. Then all of a sudden they make a trip out. He comes out here, and now there's all kinds of talk about maybe he's going to flip. And I hear that Oregon's looking at a new quarterback. So that may actually be what's going on. What do we know about Jonas Williams as a player, and how do we feel about him?
I don't think Lincoln Riley wants to get caught in the same situation like he did with the whole Juju Lewis thing. It's not the same, but it's similar. Ryder Lyons isn't going to be on anybody's campus in uniform until 2027 at the earliest. You need a quarterback in 2026. So, why not? Go get who he might think is the best quarterback in the class and get somebody who wants to help recruit for you. That was a surprise. And the fact that he was there on campus And the way Lincoln Riley was kind of holding his hand all day long, introducing him personally to Urban Magic Johnson at the basketball game, he was showing him the love. So yeah, this is going to be a fun one to watch.
You know, another one that I think is important from my perspective, Mark mentioned him, was the defensive lineman from Mater Dei, Tom Tupui, for a number of reasons. One, he's a defensive lineman. Two, he's quite large. Three, he is interested, as he has basically a new defensive line coach who really is not new, but he's been here long enough to establish himself. If I see that Tupui goes to USC, that'll be an interesting fact of getting a Mater Dei kid back at USC who's well known, who's a lineman. And the truth of the matter is, and I wrote about this many times before, I don't think, in my opinion, that a lot of people who come from out of state really don't realize the impact of USC in Southern California and in the state in general. If they know what they're doing, it's a big help. If you think, okay, I've been in the Midwest the whole time, or the Southwest Conference, that I'm going to come in and I know everything there is to know about Southern California, I'm sorry. If you don't go out there and recruit hard and get assistants to do it, the perception could be out there. Now, if it all works out, the perception of USC and recruiting everything will have a really big uptick. So I'm hoping it's a real big uptick. But even if they get all these kids visiting, they still have to get them for official visits, which many of them will do. But they have to sign them. And that's the bottom line.
And keep them. But
and I mean, who did USC have committed last March? Right? Like what their class look back then for 2025, right? I mean, Greg's right about that. Like it's such a long haul from this to actually getting them to sign. But Tom, for me, he's the benchmark for this class. He proves, I think he proves where if it's down to USC Oregon, if those are the two, I think he shines a big spotlight on the health of the USC program if he ends up going one way or the other, right? I think that's a significant recruitment that USC really has to win if they want to show we're moving forward, moving the right way, targeting the right local kids, making those positions, impactful and important as they recruit. And you're always gonna get the hey, we did everything right, and this kid woke up one day and said, I want to go somewhere else, right? I mean, that stuff's gonna happen, but it sounds like from the weekend, USC checked some boxes, put themselves in the right place for him, and now we'll see how it goes. But this is again where we're going to be set up going into another year where it's the recruits are hearing all the right things. Now they've got to see it, and we'll see if they see it. So again, the USC's setting itself up pretty well for this class. There's gonna again be some prove it on the field. I think playing really good defense again is going to be key, and winning games is going to be key.
You always have the issue of trying to hold on to a kid who wakes up close to signing day, has other people knocking on their door. It's a lot easier to hold on to that kid when he wakes up in Southern California than he wakes up in a small town in the deep South. That's just the fact. I mean, and look, USC fans need to recognize that LA is different than most of the places these guys grow up. And for some of them, that's a real pull, right? For some guys, the big city and the glamour of LA, they're all in. But for a lot of guys that grow up in other parts of the country, they're not that interested in that. It's not what they're used to. It's uncomfortable. There's all kinds of traffic. It's you don't have the same feel where every single person you run into cares more about the local football team than they do about their own wife and kids, right? It's different. And so you're not going to be able to pull everybody out of the South. You're going to find some guys who are interested, and you land them. But man, we've been talking about how in California there are positions where it's hard to get the guys you need locally. Defensive line is the primary position you talk about. To a lesser extent, offensive line, but defensive line is really the spot Where if you look at California and say, we can recruit defensive backs and receivers and quarterbacks, we can do all that. Where are the defensive linemen going to come from? Well, if there's one in Santa Ana, you have to get it. You can't continue to lose elite defensive line guys from Southern California. You already have an uphill battle in that you don't have the level of defensive line talent here that you have in Texas or Georgia or other places. You got to land those guys.
Just keeping the Paulo pipeline home is going to help USC. But, what was so interesting is you start hearing some of the feedback that Scott was providing and Steve Wilfong and Eric from this weekend. And the vibe from the players was, you know what? If we keep just, these SoCal guys home, we got a championship team here. So they're starting to have that pride again and staying home and maybe wanting to play for their dream school, their home school, USC. That's kind of been lost lately, not just with USC, but in college football in general. So if all of a sudden that's coming back full circle where people are having pride and staying home and, defending the neighborhood, there's plenty of talent in Southern California and California abroad to make USC great again.
Yeah, and you're going to have to, as Greg puts it, you're going to have to win some games, and winning games changes that, right? Because it was, around 2000, there wasn't that same pride about staying home. Kids wanted to go play at Florida State and other places, and then Pete Carroll comes in. You have a couple of big seasons, and all of a sudden that changes the perspective of California high school kids. So they're going to need to win some games, which we'll talk about in the coming weeks. But it was a good day, it seems to me. And you even get guys on campus like Chris Henry. I don't think anybody really expects they'll pull him away from Ohio State, but he showed up. And you need guys like that to show up, and it sends the right message if he's at USC checking things out than if he's not. So that's probably a good thing.
Does Pete Carroll need a wide receiver coach yet?
Are you applying?
Just curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard that, and I'm not sure I want to touch that yet. But USC did hire a wide receiver. I guess not a wide receiver, an inside receiver coach. We'll see what comes of that. By the way, I don't want you guys to get too excited, but in just a few days, we have what is traditionally one of the most exciting days of the college football calendar, high school signing day.
If I didn't know the difference, I would say you're absolutely 200% right.
Yeah.
Where we are today, it's like, okay, so if you ask people, are you more excited about what's going to happen on signing day, which there may be one player that you keep hearing about, the linebacker, or are you more excited about after spring ball and seeing what it has to offer from the portal? You're probably going to get people to say the portal. And I would understand that based on this Wednesday. However, so much is on December that really has become the way of life, so to speak.
Yeah. It's only the Eric Lorigs of the world that are still signing in February. But
did he sign?
If you've been around these boards for a long time, you know who that is. Let's talk about signing day. I think Greg's right. There's really one name that's being thrown about. There may be a surprise or two. You never know. But AJ Tuatele, linebacker, was a Washington State commit. A little bit thin, it appears, but athletic, and at this point, there are some big time programs coming after him in addition to USC. I think Texas is after him, and maybe some others. So probably a good football player, and certainly a position of need. The linebacking class was not as big as I would have hoped this past December. What do we know about Tuatele, Eric?
Well, he had about 400 tackles as a senior, and I'm exaggerating a bit, but honestly, not much. I think it was like 196 tackles as a senior. So super, super productive kid, athletic, and made just a gigantic rise in the final on 300 rankings. He went from kind of way off the board, low 3-star guy to the 147 overall player in the country for on 3. Now his industry rating, because he's a 3-star, with the other services is still, I think, 775, something around there. But as far as on three goes, if he does end up in this USC class, he's the number four kid in the class, which gives you three players in the defensive front in the top four signings for USC in this class. So again, a guy who was incredibly productive. I think he's got, like you said, there's some size stuff where you don't expect him to come in and be a thumper for you in the middle as a freshman. But USC they need to add young linebackers and get those guys kind of moving through the program right now. You had a few in the 2024 class where you like the future there, and now one and a half. We'll see what Toga ends up with. Is he kind of nickel safety wherever he ends up with? But kind of one true linebacker here, maybe two linebackers in this class, and you needed at least two.
Yeah, you really needed the kid from Florida that decommitted. I'm not over that yet. That kid's going to be a first round pick, and I'm bummed.
Could have ended up with the local kid too.
Yeah. All right, so we'll see what happens then. By the way, we should mention it because it's well deserved. Dennis Thurman elected to the College Football Hall of Fame, two-time All-American at USC. Doesn't get with the Ronnie Lott's and Troy Polamalu's and Mark Carrier's. His name probably doesn't get thrown out as much as some of these other guys, but. He was a big-time player. Greg, I suspect you have some Dennis Thurman thoughts. You were watching USC football in 76 and 77. I was not. I was a small child.
No, you're telling 1877, right?
That's right. That's right.
No,
You and Wyatt Earp hanging out in the saloon watching USC
yeah,
football.
that's right. I met Dennis Thurman when he was just graduating Santa Monica High School. And he was very confident of who he was. It was, in my opinion, bordered on, people would say, does he have to act that way? But he was a good player. He wasn't Ronnie Lott, but how many players are Ronnie Lott?
Zero. There's no other Ronnie Lott.
Yeah, there's no other Ronnie Lott. But Dennis Thurman worked his way up. Tremendous athlete. And I watched him develop at USC, which he did. In those days, people were really getting developed. And he went along with it. A part of it was that there was a tremendous amount of talent on the entire USC roster. And you could see how some players, even if they're a safety, would be influenced by not just wide receivers, but linemen attacking. And Dennis, to his credit, was very smart. And I think that shows that he went into coaching, okay, and had done a great job. And, I understand that he's maybe applied for a USC position and maybe didn't get it. Of course, he didn't get it because he's never been a coach at USC. But I think in the end, so much has to do with personality, but he was a great player. He is one of a number of players that's deserving to be in the Hall of Fame, that should be in the Hall of Fame in the future, especially when you look at some of the criteria of other Hall of Famers from other schools. There's players from Ohio State, Alabama, and I just go, come on. One good thing about being older is you watch these guys play. You've seen them many times. And Thurman belongs in the College Football Hall of Fame, no doubt about it.
I think Thurman may have coached at USC, though. I thought he was an assistant back in the Hackett and JR2 days. Am I wrong about that? Well, in any event, people look it up. If I'm wrong, they'll tell me I'm wrong. But another USC College Football Hall of Famer. There's a ton of those these days. Okay, two other things I want to talk about. We have NFL.
Do you want me to tell you that you're right, that he did coach at USC? I could do that for you.
Oh, go ahead. I appreciate it. I always like it when you guys tell me I'm right.
It's so rare. I feel like I need to jump in and
that's what I was thinking. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and use Eric for the rest of the show. Yeah, he did. He was JR2.
Eric, was it 2 years?
No, he was there from 93 to 2000. I think he was there for JR2 and Hackett for almost the whole time. So he was around for a while. You probably forgot about that because those were not fun teams to remember. With the exception of 1995, won a Rose Bowl, but still. Tough time period is what that was. Okay. NFL draft's coming up in April. USC has obviously some eligible guys, none of whom are expected to go in the first 2 rounds. I'm not sure any of them are expected to go in the first 4 rounds or 5 rounds at this point. But I do want to talk about who in this group may actually surprise some people. The draft prognosticators are not necessarily talking about him, but will make a roster, will play for a long time and be productive. So, who's your guy? Who of this year's USC draft class, the NFL, is going to make a name for themselves on Sundays?
Well,
Who you got? Okay, Greg, you start.
Thank you. I'm going to go with Jonah Monheim. He's played a lot of positions. I don't think he's been at one long enough to deserve maybe the positive accolades, but he's the type of guy that once he gets in the NFL, you know that he's a hard worker. You know that he's smart as all get out. Okay. And I think he obviously has the size and the desire. And my thing is, whoever gets him is going to get a good offensive lineman, no matter where he ends up, because he'll give you 120% of himself, because that's the type of guy he is.
Yeah, and NFL rosters don't have 85, 95, 100 guys. And so you need a guy who can plug in at center, guard, even play right tackle if you had to have him play there for a game or two. So I suspect you're right about Monheim. He probably has a future in the NFL. Who else we got? Mark, who do you have?
I know the NFL values speed. Jalen Smith has that kind of some to burn. I mean, wasn't he the fastest guy at the Reese's Bowl? When you as a defensive back, Chris, you know this. A lot of times you're going to, maybe be a little aggressive on the snap and get beat, and you have to have that makeup speed. And Jalen has that. He's got long arms as well, and I think he's going to find a role on an NFL team. Jonah Monheim, I agree. I don't think he's going to last as long as the 4th or 5th round. Maybe the 4th would be the end of the line for him. Jalen, I think, will get drafted maybe in those last few rounds that you're talking about because he's a value pick. But yeah, he's got the speed, he's got the length. We know that he is not afraid of supporting the run. So I think Jalen has a future in the NFL as well.
First of all, I don't know what you're talking about. I never got beat, but I do agree with you that Jalen Smith, I'm not going to bet against him. I thought before last season, I thought this is a guy who needs to find his way to the bench. I thought he was not a very good football player the year before. Very few players since I've been following USC have improved as much in one offseason as Jalen Smith did this past year. And you're right. He can cover, he can tackle. He turned into a pretty smart football player. I think that's a guy who makes a roster and can do some things. If nothing else, he's a guy I would expect to be a really good special teams player and a solid backup for you, who can play a nickel spot, can play corner, can probably play a little bit of safety if he had to. So I think that's right. Eric, who's yours? I know who it's got to be.
No, I'm not going to go with someone that went to the Senior Bowl. I kind of took all those guys off the expected draft picks. Like I think that especially like a guy like Jonah, I think yeah, he's an NFL guy. He screams that for a while. Can play center, can play guard, can kick out. So I'm kind of going back and forth between two, one on either side of the ball. I know Greedy Vance is little. I think he can play. I think with the NFL now, there's a need for that true nickel that can run. And now that you can't hit anybody hard anyway, there's like less emphasis on being that like physical enforcing safety. And then maybe outside the box. Kyle Ford as a physical blocking receiver who can catch a pass for you when you need to. I know, Brendan Rice didn't like catch on and was, great right off the bat in the NFL. And that's a bit of the same mold, not exactly the same, but same type of look. So, but I could see Kyle with that kind of work ethic and all of that potentially sticking and hanging a bit.
I could see him putting on 15 pounds of being an H-back too.
There's a lot, I mean, there's a lot of spots where you can use a guy like that right now. Yeah. People are
Yeah.
getting creative.
I do think too. I will talk. I will touch on the other Senior Bowl guy. I think the NFL draft. These guys from ESPN and other places who are predicting the NFL draft. I think they're sleeping on Woody Marks. I'm not saying Woody Marks is going to go high in the draft. He's not, because running backs have a hard time going high in the draft, and there are a bunch of backs ahead of Marks in that list. But I think he's a guy that could play 10 years in the NFL. I mean, he is a good runner. He can run between the tackles. He doesn't have great breakaway speed, but he's quick, and he's a fantastic pass catcher out of the backfield. And in today's NFL, that is a big deal. So I would be surprised if Woody Marks wasn't still playing in 8 years. I just think he's a really good football player.
I agree with you, Chris. I agree because I wrote him down as a surprise player. And when I watched him, like you said, you watched some of these all-star games, but he did. I thought he counted for himself pretty well. And he just needs to get drafted, even if it's the later round.
I think the big knock with Woody is he's already 25. I mean, the life expectancy in the NFL isn't long to begin with, especially at running back. So I think maybe that's the one true negative that's holding him back.
That's a fair point, and I suspect that he probably won't be playing in the NFL in 10 years for that very reason. But in these days in the NFL, you only expect to get 3 or 4 years out of your back. So who cares if he's 25 or 22? He can play. He's a guy that can contribute, and I'm excited to see what he does. Okay, we also have these 2 early All-American lists coming out. USC guys aren't factoring in on just about any of them. But I think there's some guys who, if things break right, if the team has a good record, may have a shot. So let's talk about that. Let's do it this way. Who is the most likely player on USC to make an All-American team next year? I'm not suggesting that any of them are highly likely. I'm saying who is the most likely guy? If somebody's going to do it, who is it going to be? Mark.
I'm gonna just one player.
Just one.
Right.
Eric will break the rule, but you'll follow it. Just one.
I was going to start on offense. I'll just go defense. Kamari Ramsey. I think he has the ability to be that number 7 in the defensive backfield for USC, to be the next All-American at safety. He showed what he was capable of last year. Now he's going into his 3rd year in Danton Lynn's system. He's being surrounded with more talent at USC now. I think Kamari's confidence level, knowing his high football IQ, he's probably the one guy that I'm saying, yeah, you know what? Not only is he going to be all conference, he's going to make an All-American team.
That's a good pick. I like that one. Who else do we have? You get one guy and it can't be Kamari Ramsey. Don't cheat.
Kamari's a good pick. I think that they can do a lot of stuff with him. So we can like stat sheet in different area, tackles for loss and things like that as well. I'll go offense, and I'll say Jacoby Lane. I think the touchdowns can do it, right? You catch 16 touchdowns in a year, 17 touchdowns, something like that, which, I mean, he was on pace for about 100 just based on his last.
That's 25 receptions for him. 25 receptions, 16 touchdowns.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you catch a touchdown, every other time you're touching the ball. So I think that's it. I think that, that's one of those numbers that can pop. And if he caught 7 touchdowns in his last 3 games. That's a thing that I think would make some noise.
Also a good pick. Greg Katz, who you got?
Boy, I tell you, Kamari Ramsey is the one that I was looking at, but I don't know. I get Jacoby Lane. I get that, but I don't know why Mekhi Lemon, if they throw the ball to him, and he's used as a kick returner and so on and so forth, he has a shot. Okay. Our late colleague, Kevin Bruce was an honorable mention All-American. He was also All Pac-12 or Pac, whatever it was at that time when Kevin played. So it's possible that a Mekhi Lemon could, if he has a good year. But again, both of these guys that I talked about, they need a quarterback that can get them the ball and can make the right decisions. And you know, I think the one thing that I always remember was when I was young, I used to sit and go, "Oh, he's an All-American. He must be great." And then I'd watch the NFL draft, and the guy wouldn't be drafted high or whatever. And I learned that the best All-America team, in many cases for me, is the NFL draft. Because just because I haven't heard of somebody doesn't mean they're not really, really good. You ask most people, where did Jerry Rice play college ball? A lot of people wouldn't know it. And he's one of the greatest receivers of all time.
Are you picking Mekhi Lemon to be the next Jerry Rice? That's what I'm hearing.
Well, you need to
I think he's picking Jerry Rice.
I think Jerry Rice would be an All-American too, even at 50 or whatever he is. No, he's older than that. He's older than I am.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. Do you think Brendan Rice will make the NFL because he's the son of Jerry Rice?
No, the NFL doesn't care about that. If he makes it, it's because he has good size and he runs pretty well, and they care about that. But no, the NFL doesn't care about that. If he were LeBron James's son, he might make the league, but this is a different deal. Look, I think Mekhi Lemon has a legitimate chance to make it just because USC has less receivers, and Mekhi is going to be the guy that gets thrown to most often. Jacoby Lane's going to get a lot of touchdowns. He'll make some spectacular one-handed catches. But Mekhi Lemon's a guy that can average 115 receiving yards a game, and you do that, and you get a couple of kick returns that make the highlight reels. You can make All-American team.
I have a question I have a yes or no question for each of you.
Yeah.
If Eric Gentry plays all 12 regular season games, All-American, yay or nay?
Nay.
Yeah, no, he will. He will. They used him so creatively. He fills again. He's gonna have forced fumbles. He's gonna have picks. He's gonna have sacks. He's gonna have all those things, and he's gonna have some plays that you can show right on social media, on video, like that. They'll be attention grabbing, which is just as important. Like it's just as important to have stuff that you can shove in people's faces as it is to actually play good football. Because I mean that's what it comes down to, right? The voters don't watch every single game. You need to have big impactful plays, and honestly, it doesn't hurt to look like he looks, right? Like they're gonna push. There's a 5'8" slot receiver that's making a bunch of plays. Those guys are gonna get pushed, and so I think Gentry in that same sort of mold, well, not the same mold, the opposite of it, but on that defensive side, it's one of those things people are going to want to talk about him if he's doing a bunch of different things. And it did seem to click for him at the beginning of last year.
Eric Gentry.
That's the problem, Eric. I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. He doesn't last the season.
Well,
Mark just told me he was going to play in every game.
Mark said if he plays 12 games, I'm with you. If he plays 12 games, he's going to be a superstar. I love the kid, and he's been excellent since he was a true frosh at Arizona State. He makes plays. He's a good pass rusher. He'll knife in and make plays in the backfield and get tackles for loss. He's a terror in zone defense with those long arms. The most unlikely part of the hypothetical was that he's going to play 12 games, and we all know that. He will get some protection too from the defensive line that he has not been getting in years past. USC is going to be really big up front. I think they're going to be well coached up front. And if you're an undersized linebacker, it helps to have some 340-pound space eaters in front of you. I think Gentry is going to be great. We'll see how long he plays. And this may be a situation where in the first few games of the season, you have Gentry standing on the sideline watching a lot. I don't want to see Eric Gentry get 70 plays in that opener. Right? I don't want to see that. I do want to see him get 70 plays in South Bend.
And put on a neck roll.
Yeah, put on a neck roll, that's for sure.
Old school, like the really
Yeah,
like
so
the
just in case he has to jump in the air and do a somersault and he has to land on
yeah,
the ground.
that's
Well,
fine. I think, look, getting back to Eric's point, I think Gentry with a giant 1960s style neck roll helps the look too. I think it makes him stand out. So I'm with you. He should do it. Okay. I think that covers it, guys. Anything else we want to talk about?
No, we
Yeah.
did it. We finished. We're ready to go.
One last question. Have
All
we
right.
heard yet when spring ball is going to start?
We're not having it this year, Greg. We're going the way Nebraska's going.
So new additions, new coaching additions, talking to the media on Wednesday after Riley addresses media for signing day, which honestly, it feels cheap to even call it signing day at this point. It's got to be like add-on day or something like that. We already had signing day, but my anticipation we'll start to hear something around then or shortly after about spring ball plans.
Thank you.
Okay. That's it. This was like a Navy SEAL operation. We were in, we were out. It was quick, decisive, I think. I don't know. Maybe not. We probably shouldn't compare ourselves to Navy SEALs. That's silly. Okay, fellas, if that's it, that's it. We'll see you all next week. Until then, everybody, fight on.